Okay, well, I'll tell you, so I've been listening to this record for 30 years, but I never knew any of the background on it. So I was genuinely excited to dig in and tell you this story about what I learned this week. So you guys ready to get into the background?
Let's do it, man. I'm
Yeah.
In preparation for today's show, I should say I read Andrew Lloyd Webber's autobiography, which is drolly titled Unmasked, because he also wrote Phantom of the Opera.
uh
Now, look, let's just get this out of the way right at the top. I'll be honest, I'm not repping Andrew Lloyd Webber generally. In fact, I think people with three names should rarely, if ever, be trusted. And before this week's research,
Good life rule.
I had not ever purposely listened to a note of Phantom of the Opera or Cats, but I have obviously a deep love and nostalgia for this. So let's talk
I
about
mean,
it.
I'll go as far as to say I dislike musicals as a format. Like I'm kind of starting there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go quite that far, but I certainly didn't grow up on them. I've been like slowly getting into more over time, but they rarely rock as hard as this, let me tell you.
Sure, sure.
So, just to show you how little I knew, I didn't realize Andrew Lloyd Webber was British, which he is. Shows my lack of background knowledge. Now, so he grows up outside of London. His mom's a piano teacher. He tried some piano, he tried some violin, he tried some French horn, which he lovingly calls an overdeveloped hunting instrument.
Mm. All the little sissy boy
Uh,
instruments. That's what he was playing.
yeah.
I got to tell you, he doesn't really come off great in his own autobiography, which is a tell.
Yeah.
Did he hate himself?
It didn't make me want to like more of his content. But okay, he grows up going to the theater in London and he talks about this one core memory, speaking of other musicals, about his father getting the record copy of South Pacific and playing him the hit song from that, or one of the hit songs, which is called Some Enchanted Evening. And his dad just like plays it and then puts the needle back and plays it again and then puts the needle back and plays it again. And he just very seriously looks at his son, his 8-year-old son, and goes, "If you ever write something half as good, I shall be very proud of you, my boy."
That's so British.
What a
Damn, yeah,
bizarre
that is.
thing to do.
Yeah.
Tell that to an
All
8-year-old?
yeah,
My
so all
God.
the fathers listening, if you want just like a fucking hack on how to completely ruin your child, just right there it is. Just case
Right.
closed.
And so at another turning point from his childhood, he's a nerd at school, huge surprise. But he gets up
Shocking.
he gets up at the talent show and he starts playing songs that he wrote making fun of the teachers. And he wins the school over to the point where by the time his finale, which is about the headmaster or principal, comes on, the other teachers are like cheering him on and applauding him as well. So this really sticks with him that he's bound for the stage. So he heads off to Oxford for college, and that's where he meets up with Tim Rice, who is an aspiring musician at the time. He's a couple years older than Andrew Lloyd Webber, and they end up collaborating on a set of songs for a stage show called The Likes of Us, which I'm sure you can get it now, but it doesn't really go anywhere at the time. But that's kind of their initial project they work on. Tim Rice goes ahead and graduates ahead of Andrew, right? He gets a job at EMI as like a junior producer. And again, Tim Rice isn't really thinking of himself as a lyricist or a musical theater guy at this point. He wants to be a rock star like everybody in the 60s. That's what he's going for. But he gets a job as a junior producer, and one of the acts that he gets handed to work with is a young guy called Murray Head. And Murray Head is in a band called the Blue Monks and Their Dirty Habits, which I just told you that because I like reporting on
That's-
these 60s British band names.
I actually love that band name. The Dirty Habits. That is fantastic.
Yeah.
So Murray Head is another guy who's out there looking to make a solo career as a rock star, as a singer. Never really takes off, but he is the singer who plays Judas on the record we listened to. And I'm embarrassed to say I just learned today he's also the singer on the song One Night in Bangkok. Are you guys familiar with that one?
I'm not.
No.
It came up a lot when I told people I had just moved back from Bangkok. It's
Oh,
not good. It was a hit from another musical later in the 70s,
all right.
but it's goofy enough that it's probably worth the listen, so check it out on the playlist. Okay, so Tim and Andrew stay friends, and even though Andrew's still at university, like I said, he's a couple years younger, and they kind of both take note of Murray's ability to just vocally riff. They think he's an excellent singer. They file it away, that he's this undiscovered talent, right? Now, one day, Andrew gets a call from an old music teacher, and this guy's working at a prep school, and he asks him to write something for his students to perform, like 12-year-olds. They call it a pop cantata. I'm not really sure what that is, but it's a short bit
Okay.
of musical theater that people can sing on the stage. And so he asked Tim to collaborate with him on it, and they search around for a story of what the heck to write about.
Rob, when you're moving, getting the crackle and high pitch sound.
squeal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I won't fuck with the chord more. Should I do that part again?
You probably should.
Yeah.
I
If
don't
we
know they
heard it,
really
it's
use-
probably.
yeah, it's on the
yeah.
track, I'm sure.
So one day, Andrew gets a call from an old music teacher at a prep school. This guy's working at a prep school at this point, and he asks him to write something for his students who are in the 12 to 13 kind of range for the students to perform. He calls it a pop cantata. It's basically just a short musical piece that you can perform on stage. And Andrew takes the job, and he asks Tim to collaborate with him on it. So what do they do first? They search around for a story to write about. Now, the school in question, I guess, had recently done like a retelling of some Bible story or another. And so the two hit on the idea of continuing that tradition, right? And they pick up a copy of something called the Wonder Book of Bible Stories, basically a children's picture book
Right. Right.
of the major events from the Bible. Side note, Andrew Lloyd Webber in his book is unironically like, hey, readers, pro tip, this Bible thing, turns out it's got some pretty good story material in it. So
True. Yes.
it's true. No, I mean, he's right, but it's just
Yeah.
a silly thing for him to say, I feel.
Right.
So,
Pro tip.
yeah. In any case, it's 1967 at this point, and they write some songs for what would become Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Now, for listeners who may not be familiar, this is a Bible story about a bunch of jealous brothers who sell their younger brother into slavery. So perfect for
Pro
kids,
move.
obviously.
Another pro move.
And then
Pro
later in the story, Joseph rises to prominence and power in the Pharaoh's court by interpreting dreams and enacts Count of Monte Cristo style slow burn revenge on everyone. So again, perfect for kids.
You got to teach them young. They're going to be the future leaders of Britain. You know, they got to be cutthroat.
No, that's probably not how it ends. I can't remember. Maybe hugging ensues. So the overall gestalt of the piece is like hipping up the Bible, right, for the 60s. The Pharaoh character is like an Elvis impersonation. It seemed cool at the time. It was 1967, right? But keep in mind, this is intended for a one-off children's performance at a prep school. So this is not
A
this is
little
not an exciting
overkill.
gig. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be seen by like 25 bored parents. Who are just like, okay, yeah, there's my son's line. I'm going to stop paying attention now.
That's basically where their prospects are set at this point. And Andrew Lloyd Webber realizes that kid performers get bored easily. So he unintentionally, he says, creates what ends up being his trademark, which is what's called a sung through musical. The entire story is told in song lyrics, which is actually not that common for the classic musicals. Like I happened to be listening to West Side Story the other day, and the story, I assure you, is not fully told in the songs. It's actually kind of confusing to listen to the cast album if you're not super familiar with the story. So-
Okay.
So this is a very easy one to consume. Well, both Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Code and JC Superstar, because they are what's called sung through musicals, right? Anyway, in this format, the musical structure takes on even more significance than normal, right? The time signatures, the key relationships, they all have to play kind of a bigger role to carry the weight of the story along. So these are some of the things we alluded to in JC Superstar, and that I think really help sell that story, and one of the reasons they do make so many twists and turns musically, and it works. Anyway, the kids' performance.
Sometimes it worked here. Doesn't always work. Let's
Doesn't
be
always
clear
work.
about
Doesn't
that.
always
Doesn't
work.
always work. Yeah.
I'm actually, yeah, okay. I'm surprised it worked as well as it did, but it really did in this case. So, kids' performance goes well. They somehow, off of that, because I guess it's a prestigious prep school, so there are important people there. They start getting offers to produce a bigger, longer version of the show, because the thing they wrote was only like 20 minutes long. But they refuse help, And after writing some more songs, they rent a theater and stage a couple versions of it themselves in London. Now, the press from those performances gets them a recording contract. They make it into an album. It gets released in January 1969. And just as a timeline reference, that's the same month that the Beatles are making the Let It Be album that we covered way back in our Let It Be episode. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
How old are they at this point?
Andrew Lloyd Webber's probably 19, and Tim Rice is like 22.
Good Lord.
In 69. God damn.
Wow.
Right around there. I think he might have been 21 by the time JC Superstar album came out in 70.
Damn.
Yeah. So yeah, they're younger than you might expect. They seem like they've been old men forever, right? Just in your
Yes.
mind.
Yeah, just
Absolutely.
writing musicals feels like a very old man thing to do.
So the album release is a minor hit. The shows sell decently, and so naturally they set about making a follow-up. And they initially think biblical, of course, because as writers, they don't actually want to write anything new. And they're only aware of a single book at the library. So now Andrew
One with the
mentioned-
gilded edges.
Right, yeah. It's full of stories. But let me tell you, sir, they initially consider a story about Moses. But unfortunately, a parody columnist weirdly predicts that with a rare pre-boosh when he writes an article about Joseph entitled Mr. Moses and the Amazing 200-Foot Cybernetic Fun Calf. So they scrapped that idea. Yeah.
That's real
pretty
good.
good.
A pre-boosh.
So, they want to continue their partnership. They want to write something new. They have a little bit of heat, they think, not really. And they're on the lookout for a good angle to write about. And one day, Andrew, or maybe it's Tim Rice, hears a song on the radio. It's Bob Dylan singing With God on Our Side, which it's a terrific early Bob Dylan song about how throughout history, every side of every conflict is taught to believe that God is on their side, no matter what atrocities they commit. And one of the climax verses has these lines: "Through many dark hours, I've been thinking about this, that Jesus Christ was betrayed by a kiss, but I can't think for you. You'll have to decide whether Judas Iscariot had God on his side." And it's like,
Whoa,
bang,
that's heavy, right?
bang, lightning bolt, right?
Yeah.
And I can't remember if they said it was Tim Rice. Maybe it was Tim Rice who pitched this immediately. He said, "Let's retell the story from Judas's perspective. He's fated to betray Jesus. He suffers and dies for it. He's considered pretty much the worst villain in history for it. Let's recast it from his side of the story," which is brilliant.
That's
Absolutely.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's
Very-
pretty cool.
Very, very cool. So quick, I want to make sure we're bringing the audience along because I know we know this stuff, but the story in question, as we mentioned, covers the last week of Jesus's life, from when he comes back into Jerusalem through the Last Supper, his arrest, his trial, and execution. So quick Bible lesson for those that may not know. There's 4 Gospels that each tell the story of Jesus's life and death, written by different authors 3 generations after Jesus died also, and sometimes they conflict with each other a bit. This story is drawn from that basic story beats, or those basic story beats described in those Gospels, with an emphasis on the interpersonal relationships, which are maybe slightly implied, but definitely not delved into in the text. Now, the gist of the story is something like this. Jesus is going around Palestine preaching an updated version of religion and God. He's a Jew, keep in mind, emphasizing loving one's neighbor and being nice to each other. What an idiot. And he's got
Woke.
Never gonna work.
he's got kind of a big following out of it. Now the
I thought you were
following
going to say dick.
now the following is seen as a threat both to the Roman Empire, which is occupying and controlling the area, but also to the Jewish religious authorities, who see him as a revolutionary who could unseat their power, or maybe just foment a backlash from the Roman overseers. So the characters that we have in this story are Jesus, his main followers called apostles, which include Judas, who ends up betraying him, and his main squeeze, Mary Magdalene, who is a prostitute by profession. Plus, we have the Roman governor Pilate and the high priests of Jewish authority in the area, Caiaphas and Annas. And one last religious note, we did mention this already, but I have it here in my notes. The Bible does not at all indicate that Jesus and Mary were together romantically, like at all. But there's always been some scholarly speculation around the early church possibly removing his marriage to her from the story to make Jesus seem more godly and less like a family man, which would have been more typical of any person from that time, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Wh-
I also think that it is interesting that when you are selecting the story from the Gospels, like you said, they contradict each other. They were written for different audiences. And so some of them make the Romans out to seem like they were just, their hands were forced by these goddamn Jewish priests who, because they were preaching to people who were in the Roman Empire, and they were trying to make it seem like, oh no, you guys weren't the bad guys. It's the Jews that were the bad guys. And some of the, like, that's where a lot of these, that's where I think where a lot of the interesting things about the way that they crafted this story comes from. They had to pick and choose sort of which versions they wanted to take which threads of the storyline from to craft their own narrative, which I think is just really cool.
Well said. And that, speaking of narrative, brings us to our newest and most likely to offend various listeners segment. Is it punk? Bible
No.
edition.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to throw out a Bible character to you guys, and you have to tell me if they are in fact punk.
Okay.
First up, Noah.
Not punk.
Not punk.
Why?
Because he follows directions. He's
So
he
true.
listens to somebody, an authority figure giving him instructions. Not punk.
Didn't he also get so drunk he had sex with his daughters, I believe?
Either
That's
way,
from
he's
the
not
Bible
punk.
people.
You're correct.
Yeah.
Noah is not punk. First of all, shipbuilding of any sort is not at all punk. Plus, surviving the complete destruction of the world, lame.
Yeah, seriously.
And
Okay.
wait. And weren't all the people killed because they were heathens? That's punk.
That's
Yeah.
punk.
That's
Oh,
right.
yeah,
That's
you're right. Yeah,
punk.
everybody who died,
Yes.
as in everyone on Earth except him. and his-
Okay, next up. The prodigal son. Punk or not
Punk.
punk?
Fuck, that's a
Not
tough one.
punk.
Wait. Is the prodigal son the one that leaves and comes back, or the one that's all butthurt about it?
Leaves
the
and
one who
comes
leaves and
back.
comes back.
That's pretty punk.
Actually, I'm going to reverse it and say not punk.
Not
Because I think,
punk.
yeah.
I'm going
Incorrect.
the-
The prodigal
Oh,
son
man.
is punk. First, hell yes. He ditched his hometown. He went traipsing around the world. He spent his inheritance being a complete fucking party animal, then shows up back at home and still gets to eat the fatted calf. That is punk, dude.
All right. Good
A
call.
real
All right.
punk would just become homeless. And be like, I'll figure this out.
Okay, I got one last one to bring this segment home. We have the Good Samaritan. Punk or not punk?
Ooh, Jesus.
Super punk. Super punk. Because you know what he said? Fuck what society wants me to do. I'm taking care of this guy. And punks get a bad rap, but they're not all bad people. He was like
I'm with
societal
Tom.
norms.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. Yeah.
That's
Totally
good.
correct. This dude is from a disparate way of life, but he is still a super chill citizen who stops to help a beat up naked guy and pour oil on him and pay for his hotel that night. And in my experiences, punks may look scary, but outside the
really
show
good.
where they're spitting on
Yeah.
everything, punks are polite.
Yeah. If you get knocked down in the pit, somebody's going to help you up.
True.
They
Yeah,
might have been the one who knocked you down, but they will definitely help you up after that.
That is the latest edition of Is It Punk? Thank you for participating. Okay.
Rob, that was bad.
Let's
was
get, let's get back to our
By the way, just a quick point of clarification. It was Lot that got drunk and slept with his daughters, not Noah. I don't have confirmation that Noah slept with his daughters, but they did have to repopulate the world. So you do your own math
Hey,
there,
running
people.
out of yeah.
Didn't want to slander these Bible personalities.
Stand up. Here.
Okay, let's get back to the story. So they try some pitching around town to make what will become JC Superstar into a stage player music, but no one is biting. So they tone down the ask and try to get a record deal. They can't quite get that either, but they do get funding for a single. So to get started, they write one song called Superstar. They pitch it to MCA, who agrees to produce it as a single and give them a budget for an orchestra and a gospel choir and a full rock band, which is nuts, by the way. It's a big
Right.
ask for one song.
Yeah,
Who are they intending to release a single? Like, who do they think in 1969 is going to buy a single? Do they think that religious people are that hip at this time? Because I'm
Maybe.
thinking
When did
it's-
Tommy come out? Maybe they're trying to ride like the Tommy wave a little bit. Maybe they think.
Tommy, I think,
Okay.
came out right around this time. They're also
Okay.
riding just a little bit of heat. I didn't talk about it, but they had a hit, a semi-hit single from the Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat album.
Okay.
I think it's called
Okay.
Any Dream Will Do. It did okay, and then they started the process of putting that onto the London stage, I believe, before it went to Broadway. But so they had some credentials, but not enough to get a full record deal or to get a new stage show off the ground, sight unseen, right?
and there's a market for this type of thing too, right? Like I'm used to just, it's the late 60s, everything's rock and roll, but there's obviously people who are buying, like you said, buying this album, these religious albums that are just musicals.
I mean, is it religious? That's the question. But yes, I
Yeah,
think
okay.
the market was undetermined. Certainly, I don't think anyone predicted that this would end up being the hit that it became.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Well, they
So-
also have that built-in angry religious people who buy your records and then burn them.
Oh
in a
yeah.
big show
Oh,
of
capitalize,
protest.
yeah,
You're just like
good.
just raking in that money every time you
buy
burn
it
an
first.
album. Yeah.
So they are casting effectively for the single. At this point, it's only a single. And that's the only song they've written. They think back, they remember Murray Head, and they cast him as Judas to sing this song. Again, he's just some guy on the London music scene who's bopping around, singing in bands. And he very helpfully intros them to some other people on the scene, like Joe Cocker's Rhythm Section, aka the Grease Band, who are on a break from their obligations with Joe Cocker. This is I'm talking the bass player, the drummer, and both guitar players, rhythm and lead, are from that band. Like they had just played Woodstock with Cocker.
Yeah.
Damn.
And they are slick
Yeah,
as fucking
they-
grease
yeah.
too. They're good.
They're like,
That makes a
they're
lot of
this-
sense.
Isn't gonna name like the carnival or the circus or something?
They're called the Grease Band. And listen,
Well,
you know, I think
it doesn't
Cocker is a
matter.
guy who does not get enough credit. He's not on the 1001 albums list, but those first two Cocker records, at least, are awesome. You know, I think he gets maligned because he only does covers for the most part, but they're fun records to listen to, dude. The band
His
is
Woodstock
kicking.
performance is a real throwdown too. Like, like if you listen to the old school Woodstock disc, like I think he has like 4 tunes on there, and they all rip.
And that's Alan Spenner on bass, by the way, who is also like 20 at Woodstock. Like they're all just kids. I watched some of the live footage I was like, I just want to see like Alan Spenner and Roland, the drummer. What's his first name? God damn it. Bruce Rowland. I was like, I just want to see them because I knew that they were these kind of young dudes. And you look at them, they're like kids. They're
Yeah.
kids, and they're just ripping it confidently in front of like 100,000 people. No problem at all. Like I would have been pissing my pants if I was in that crowd. I would have been like, "There's too many people. I can't handle this." They're on the stage, killing it at
Wow.
20.
It is wild. And this band really, I mean, the writing is good, but this band, I think, really sells the record in a huge way. This core band. They end up adding a couple other members later, right? A saxophone player and a keyboard player. But okay. Interestingly, one of the places they go knocking to try to get the record made was the Beatles record label, Apple, who ended up passing. But there's a couple interesting Beatles connections nonetheless, because we're all Beatles nerds. So
Yeah.
one, there is a sadly unfounded rumor that John Lennon got asked to play Jesus, and that his one condition was that Yoko play Mary. But that's been around in the tabloids for a long time. But Andrew Lloyd Webber staunchly dismisses that as complete fiction.
Can you
I mean, it is-
imagine
it's
her
very
trying to sing these lines?
I don't think John could sing most of these lines.
Yeah, you're right. Definitely not.
No, he could not. And I don't hate his voice, but he definitely can't because these guys fucking wail.
Well, yeah.
So additionally, Peter Brown, the Beatles' assistant and occasional band manager after Brian Epstein's death, he gets a call out in the Ballad of John and Yoko, recall. He ends up helping get the record produced elsewhere and becomes a longtime friend and collaborator of Andrew Lloyd Webber and ends up helping bring JC Superstar, the stage show, all around the world. So he possibly, he heard an inkling of it and he's like, oh, Apple doesn't want it? Like, maybe I'll have a coffee with this guy later.
Nice.
I got one more for you, which is Henry McCullough, the lead guitar player from Joe Cocker's band. He ends up playing lead guitar. He's lead guitar on this record. He's in Cocker's Woodstock band, like we said. He's also the lead guitar player throughout the entirety of the band Wings.
Man.
No way.
Yeah, Wings are great. I love
Yeah,
Wings.
man. That's awesome.
So, okay, they record one song, Superstar. It gets recorded for MCA, and it gets released, and it becomes somewhat of a surprise hit internationally. It hits like #1 in Holland. It zooms past Led Zeppelin and Elvis. It's like #1 in Brazil and New Zealand, right? It's a hit in the UK. It only hits 14 in the US, but pretty significant.
Still.
Right.
That's crazy. Yeah.
No one
And
is.
I love that. I love that they got the part of the concept for naming the album Jesus Christ Superstar from a picture of Tom Jones with a shirt on. I think they said the Superstar or something like that. So Phil, you were questioning earlier whether or not Jesus is like hanging a big hog. And if Tom Jones is the inspiration for this, I think that they canonically would write in that Jesus is just like smuggling squirrels in those pants.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Guys,
He's got
please.
he's a confident individual.
Guys, please. Jesus' rig is obviously legendary.
Why do you think he was hanging out with Mary Magdalene all the time? She's the prostitute. And she's like, I haven't even seen that before. This is
Oh
crazy,
my
man. I do this
God.
professionally.
So, based on
Please send your pipe bombs to 1001 album complaints.
based on the success of that single, the record company approves a £20,000 budget for the rest of the album, which is insane. That's something like a $330,000 budget today.
In 1970, right? That's huge.
Yeah.
Wow.
But, and this is, they haven't even written it yet. So first they got to go write it. So they talk about how Andrew Lloyd Webber talks about how because it's not a stage show yet, they have no theatrical elements to fall back on. We kind of talked about this earlier. It's a sung through musical. They can't use any stagecraft to tell the story. It's basically a musical radio play. But ultimately,
Okay.
he said that gave him a big advantage later because then audiences in the future, when it became a stage show, they came to know the recording so well that no future musical director could add or change that much. But at the time, it was a
very
challenge.
cool. Yeah.
Okay, back to fun casting notes. So at this point, they've got Judas. He's already done the single, and they lock him in for the record. They got their backing band coming back for the album sessions, but they haven't cast Jesus yet. Now, their first choice is another British singer who got praised on this here show many, many, many episodes ago, but who sings in, I'd say, a completely different style from Ian Gillian, who eventually does it. Any thoughts?
Rod Stewart.
Stewart.
Van Morrison.
No, you guys are way off. You guys are way off.
Morrissey. No.
more.
A 10-year-old Morrissey.
It's Colin Blumstone of the Zombies.
Whoa.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
The only reason he doesn't do it is because he gets denied contractually from participating. Now, Andrew Lloyd Webber claims that this was a Tim Rice suggestion. He always knew Colin didn't have the rock and roll grit to sell the part that he wanted. Along comes a young guy called Ian Gillian, who's been bopping around the London scene, but he has just been hired as Deep Purple's new singer. So he's definitely not a star yet. We're still like 3-4 years before Smoke on the Water. In fact, Ian Gillian, who plays Jesus in Jay Superstar, sings all the big Deep Purple hits, including Smoke on the Water, but this is before that happens, right? This is just as Deep Purple is making the change over to harder rock. And in fact, the first record they record with Ian is happening right around the same time as these recording sessions. It's called In Rock. It's the one with them on Mount Rushmore. Hearing Ian gets Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim both very excited. They're like, holy shit, our Jesus is going to be a red-blooded dude with spunk, not some bloke in a white robe clasping a baby lamb. Which, like, yeah, that was a huge decision that really makes the record. And basically, as soon as they hear him, Andrew Lloyd Webber goes back and starts rewriting a bunch of the musical parts to fit this guy's voice because he has a crazy range.
That's really interesting to think. Like, if you've got ideas and then this singer comes along, you're right, and they've got this remarkable range, and you're like, oh my God, I can do so much. I can make this part high and really powerful and bring things around. Like, that's got to be super exciting for these guys.
I feel like he's like, I owe it to the audience to make him scream a couple of times because he has one of the better sing
Rock
screams
and
I've
roll
ever heard.
scream, yeah.
Jeez.
It's
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
of control good.
Well, I mean, like a quick little Google search here says that he's like 4.5 to 5 octave range. This is like Mariah Carey sort of shit, right? Like this is like very, very wide.
Yeah.
I got it.
Wide range.
I do think he is the vocal star of the whole album, but I gotta say Judas also has a pretty big range too.
yeah.
So what's a little surprising is they already had a guy like that, and they were even thinking of the Zombies lead singer, who I'm sure is a great singer, but like doesn't have any of that.
Putting him next
element.
to that guy would.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Well,
right.
I could see if they were trying to go for a contrast. Judas is the dirtier, angrier one, and Jesus is the sweeter, calmer one. That could have worked with those two voices. But I like that they also do portray Jesus as kind of pissed off some of the time, because he's as they always said in the Catholic dogma, fully God and fully human, and they get his fully human side across on this.
No, in the context of the story, I do, and sort of back all the way to the top, Rob, and this sort of like blowing my mind the first time I was exposed to this story. Like, I do feel like the way it's presented, like Jesus and Judas are intellectual equals. The rest of the apostles are like schlubs. They're just like there to just
What are you
like
gonna
do the
do?
work,
Sure,
you know.
yeah.
Like, but like Jesus and Judas are they're intellectual equals. They're real. They're
They're the actual friends and not hangers
yeah,
on.
yeah, they're the actual friends.
Yeah.
The other guys are
Yeah.
just like muscle,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Okay, so they round out the rest of the cast basically with people from the London scene. They actually put a call out to Clapton. He doesn't want to do it because he always makes bad choices. But the other people are just people from bands on the London scene. For instance, Victor Brox, the dude who plays Caiaphas, who was absolutely my favorite when I was 12 years
Yeah.
old. He's the
Was he low
low-voiced
voice
priest.
guy? Oh my
Yeah,
God.
yeah.
Yes.
And what
20
was he
decibels
doing
louder
before
than
that?
everyone else.
He was a total scenester. He's someone
Yeah.
who, a singer, he's someone who Hendrix and Tina Turner both described as their favorite white blues singer.
Yeah, I mean, he has like 6 testicles or something like that to relate those notes. It's out of control. It sounds weird. Like, I love it, but like when you hear him singing by himself, you're like, this is great. And then you hear him singing with other people, and you're like, your voice is just so different and unique. It doesn't match anyone else's voice.
Yeah, it's really something. And you should consider looking up this guy's picture on Wikipedia. He's a character.
What's his name again?
Victor Brox.
Okay.
Okay, I got one more fun casting thing. Then we're gonna get to the recording, and then we're gonna talk about the songs. So, the dude who plays Herod was the lead singer in a band called Manfred Mann, which confusingly is not the same as Manfred Mann's Earth Band, who we all know from their 70s hit Blinded by the Light. This is Manfred Mann's precursor band. But get this. This is the guy who plays Herod on the record. And even bigger credit to this guy's name, he's the co-writer on the song Build Me Up Buttercup.
Oh, wow. All right. Man, that
Wow.
money's probably still rolling in from that one.
Yeah,
Indeed.
man.
Recorded initially by the Foundations, but written or co-written by this guy. Okay, so on to the recording of this record. So they talk about how most of the days in the recording studio started with jams. Andrew Lloyd Webber liked the idea. He wanted to get the band loose first, so they didn't feel like they were recording what were in many cases tiny little snippets of songs. And he also knew that he needed to get them loose so that they could groove easily on some of these weird time signatures or the time signature changes that we've talked about. And so in part because they had that budget, they just like come in and jam on 7/4 for 30 minutes to find the groove. And then they'd go lay down a track like The Temple, which we'll get into.
That's cool.
Interestingly, though, they didn't have too much money because at one point the production does run out of money, which, damn,
That
like how
seems
did they do that?
insane. Like just take 1 second and think about what you'd spend your 300 grand on.
Too much cocaine on this Jesus project. That's what they blew all their money on.
They had a lot of people in the studio, though. They had like a 60-piece orchestra. They have like a
Yeah.
gospel choir.
Adds up fast, sure.
But anyway, what happens is they can't pay the performers. So they start offering points on the record. Now, Murray Head, a.k.a. Judas, takes them up on it happily. Yvonne
take 30.
Elman, who plays Mary, is like, no dice.
That was probably a pretty poor financial decision on her part, I would imagine. She's
right.
like, I'll take scale. You just give me like £4 a day. Yeah, I'll take that
Yeah.
instead.
She ended up being paid £100 in total for her performance, whereas if she had taken the points, it would have been like 100,000.
Holy shit. Dude,
But-
that's crazy.
That said, she did make it into the cast of the eventual film, and I think she played Mary Magdalene on Broadway as well. Not all the performers made it over to those things. She's one of the ones that did, so I guess she did okay.
So the rest of them were uggos, is what you're saying?
Actually, side note, did you know Mary Yvonne Elman? She's come up on this podcast before because she's a background singer on that Eric Clapton record that we did.
Yeah.
Oh.
On what?
All right.
Ocean Boulevard, 451 Ocean.
On 451 Ocean Boulevard. Yeah. And oh man, what is her hit? She had a hit song in the 70s called If I Can't Have You, which the Bee
I don't
Gees
want
wrote.
nobody, baby. And I
It's a Bee Gees written song, but she's the original artist. She sang it for the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack.
no way. Okay, nice.
Yeah.
The idea of Clapton on this record kind of blows my mind because simultaneously, like, I hate Clapton, but he also has like he has a real knack of like thriving off other people's energy. So I could see how like he actually kind of could have been good on this.
I'm sure he could have been good,
A lot
but
of
I got
blood to drink here.
I got no complaints about this band. I would change nothing
Sure,
that this
sure,
band
yeah.
does. They absolutely crush it.
I think they let the rhythm section shine more often than not. And I think if you had a big gun, a big swinging dick like Clapton, that would not happen as much. So I think it would have detracted, actually.
He'd be like, Jesus actually hated immigrants too. Can we get a song in there about that?
So at this point, reminder, there is zero guarantee that this music ever sees a stage at all, right? Or it becomes a hit or sells any records, any of it. But an interesting financial note is that Andrew Lloyd Webber is forced into negotiations to give up a significant portion of the rights to the recording, but he very smartly retains almost all the rights for future theatrical or film productions. And at the time, this was like went unnoticed almost in the negotiations because they were like, what are the chances this ever amounts to anything?
Right.
But that was a good call. So
Smart man. Yep.
come around to the release in October of 1970. Now, believe it or not, critics, at least in the UK, were lukewarm. They label it too cool for the Jesus freaks, too powerfully uncool for the rockers. But luckily, the US is there to help record sales along. And a couple interesting notes about the initial release. The original pressings of the vinyl record, they opened up, the gatefold opened up into a star and gave everyone paper cuts, which Andrew Lloyd Webber implies that he like intended because he liked the bloody imagery associated
Oh God.
with the record.
Yeah. He wants some stigmata going on from the people as they open it.
But no one else liked that. So very quickly, for the first American pressing, they created the now iconic angel cover gold on brown. And this is just an interesting little tidbit that I'd never heard anyone do before. But for the U.S. press tour, Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice thought it was a good idea. And I think it was kind of cool. They created and pressed a vinyl copy of canned answers to the most popular questions that interviewers wanted to ask them. And then distributed those vinyls to local radio stations around the country so that DJs could pretend they were interviewing them on the air.
I like
That's-
that idea a lot.
Pretty baller.
That's
Pretty
awesome.
good. Yeah.
Wow.
Couple other quick notes. While in the U.S., they tried unsuccessfully to get Linda Ronstadt to record a version of I Don't Know How to Love Him. She did not. But instead, someone called Helen Reddy, the woman who recorded I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar, ended up recording and releasing her version of it, and it charted on the Hot 100 at the same time as the original version. That's one of only a couple times that's ever happened in the history of Billboard.
At the same
Interesting.
time. Wow. That's wild.
But ultimately, it was selling, but the critics did not love it. It was compared unfavorably to Tommy, which had come out the year before. It was called a labor of optimism with almost no inspiration. In fact, when it isn't dead boring, it's embarrassing, which leads us to our favorite segment, By the Numbers. How many records did this sell? The first number I want to throw out to you is 7. 7 million copies sold to date of this particular album. So ultimately, it did prevail. But even more importantly, the next number, 237. That's the millions of dollars the Broadway show grossed in its initial 8-year run
Woo.
in the
$250
70s.
million.
And that is
is
70s money.
That's 70s money.
Crazy.
Ooh.
God damn.
But
No
wait a
wonder
second.
Andrew
Andrew
Lloyd Webber
Lloyd-
hasn't had to write anything good since then.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But I'm going to reveal to you the most astounding number, guys, which is 3. That is the total number of hours it took for Ian Gillan to nail all his vocals.
Woo.
He literally
Damn.
stopped by for the afternoon and was back playing with Deep Purple that night.
What the fuck,
God.
So
man?
that's like a maybe. So there are times on the record where I especially with the vocals, I sense that like they're live takes, right? There's just some notes that they don't quite get to, but for me, like that's part of what makes it awesome. Now you're telling me the dude like rolled in and basically did 1, maybe 2 takes of
Yeah.
2/3 of the record.
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause
If
he's
you
all
go
over
and
the record.
if you add up
that's
the
what I'm
amount of
saying, it's
time
all
that
over
he
the record.
sings, he's
That's what
probably
I'm saying.
singing for 45 minutes.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Totally.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
2 takes.
Yeah.
He gets 2 takes. And he's
Right.
Yeah, 2 takes and 2 playbacks max. Yeah.
Yeah. God damn.
Okay,
Whew.
we're almost to the songs now, but a couple other notes about the legacy. So it becomes a hit. They of course start thinking about a stage production. There was already movie interest, right? This thing is on fire. But as Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice argue with each other and search around for the right producer, it's starting to get put on as a show all over the world, completely out of the hands of the creators. Now, this is a strange loophole because it's considered a recording and not a stage play because it has 0 spoken parts. All these producers have to do is pay a very small performance license fee as opposed to like a box office royalty. And that means they can do whatever. It's like performing a cover set, right? And the performance standards, of course, are all over the place.
Shit.
I'm picturing some little village somewhere trying to pull this off.
Right.
So that means that I can get my stage show of Beyonce's Lemonade starring me going, and I just have to pay her like a pittance.
yes. Yes.
Interesting you mention it because this case led to legal action, to cease and desist, and it eventually led to a precedent-setting decision for this type of thing warranting full royalties, thus closing that loophole.
It is an interesting though, like it's an interesting sort of detail of the era, right? And maybe even in general of like this idea that like what you just said reminds me both of the Grateful Dead taper section and like Google search engine in the early 90s, right? Like you just have to give it away. You got to give it away for free and figure out how to make money on it later.
After
Which
the
sounds
fact.
like they did by suing the fuck out of people, which is
Well, they also
Wrong move.
that took time. They also got their own performances going as quickly as possible. But that was a perfect segue, Phil, to the next little tidbit. Speaking of the era of what things were like back then, and it's going to reference the Grateful Dead, is that live sound at the time, meaning adjusting the sound live to trade vocal parts, to bump the orchestra or bump the bass or bump Jesus in this part, was basically non-existent, right? At this point in like 1970, rock bands got on stage, they sound checked themselves briefly, and then they just had at it. And it was bands like the Grateful Dead that pioneered bringing a sound guy along. This is in the late 60s they started doing that. And keep in mind that dude also had the job of making acid in his bathtub. So
that guy is an old school maniac, an old school math mind maniac. Absolutely. What's that dude's name? Like
Owsley.
Ely or something?
Owsley Stanley.
Yeah. That's him. Yeah. Oh, the bear, right?
So yes, exactly. So it was a huge challenge even when they got this tour off the ground in the U.S. because they had a 60-piece orchestra, they had a rock band, they had a gospel choir, they had singers on stage trading off, and it took a lot of training in these houses they were playing to even think about getting it right. Another interesting note is that one of the things that Andrew said is that he noticed in one of the first performances they did, like I think it was in Pittsburgh, that the audience didn't applaud when the songs were over. And he realized that was because they hadn't built in obvious applause breaks or applause getting endings to the songs the way one would if you were designing the show for the stage directly. So that's why over time they wrote a few more songs and they kind of changed some of the arrangements. By the time it made it to the movie, that's more of a production of what the stage show was like.
So like a
Oh.
lot of rewrites after the fact. So they're completely getting away from the New Testament. Okay. Rewrites after the fact are not in line with the New Testament.
with the Old Testament.
And also, speaking of that difference, of course, most of the performers from the record were in committed bands. So they couldn't tour or plan to be on Broadway. So they set to recasting. In some of the initial shows, Ben Vereen played Judas,
Mm.
interestingly. And
Yeah.
they had actually already signed a contract for Yvonne Elliman to play Mary Magdalene. She is on the record, and she went on to be on Broadway as well as in the film. But they auditioned a young unknown for Mary Magdalene anyway. Someone convinced them they had to see this person. This singer had been playing the gay bathhouses of New York and getting a name for herself with bands like New York Dolls opening for her. That was a callback to our New York Dolls episode. Anyone remember who I'm talking about?
I'm gonna
Oh,
go
is
with
it
Deborah Harry.
Bette Midler.
Bette Midler.
Midler.
Whoa, nice.
Yeah.
They loved her, but they couldn't contractually cast her. Okay, last note.
Just a quick. You're talking about Ben Vereen, the guy who was on Zoobly Zoo back in the day. That's
That's
the guy
correct.
you're talking about.
This
Okay.
is
That's
yeah,
why
he
I
got his start
giggle.
on Broadway.
I don't want. Yeah. Okay.
And then he went to Zoobly Zoo. That seems like a pretty big
I think
step
I
down.
remember him from the Ocean Spray commercial.
All right.
He was very theatrical in singing in Jubilee Zoo. It was very Broadway, so it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Last thought before we get to the songs. This album has cast a long shadow on our culture. In addition to all the Broadway revivals and cast recordings that you're going to find on Spotify, I have uncovered 2 tribute albums that I wanted to bring to this audience's attention. The first one is called Jesus Christ Surfer Star. And it's a compilation album where every track from JC Superstar is covered instrumentally by surf rock bands. And I'm about to get serious now, guys. The second one is called Muppet Christ Superstar. And it is a labor of love from some weirdo doing all the Muppet voices.
No.
Where
He's
can I
Still on
find this?
Spotify.
Yeah, dude.
It-
yeah,
it is
if
not on
If that
Spotify.
dude listens and writes in, like, I'll give him my.
His
email.
name is Christo Graham. I originally found this on Bandcamp years ago, actually. It's great. You can get it on YouTube now, for
Christo,
sure.
it's my
If you
man.
search Muppet Christ Superstar, you will find it. Jesus is played by Kermit, of course, and Judas
Yeah.
is played by Gonzo.
And of course, Mary Magdalene is Miss Piggy.
Of
I
course.
assume. Yeah, right.
Yes.
Tom,
that's
Tom,
great.
a few years ago, didn't you circulate some dude who does like all vocal recreations of famous records? I feel like there was a really bad.
Talking about
like,
my
Stevie-
dick?
No,
My Dick
no,
Band?
it's in
Oh.
that.
Yeah. No.
I
I don't
remember a
that.
really bad version of bad, brilliant version of Ricky Don't Lose That Number going around.
Actually, that rings a bell. That might have been me.
Yeah.
Let's go back through the messages.
He did all of Can't Buy a Thrill. It's
I
something
find some
else.
weird shit on the
What
internet.
what a psycho. And to be clear, I'm complimenting him.
Christoph. Yeah, yeah.
All of them.
All of
Anyone.
them.
Anyone who's willing to put that level into it. Good for you. Okay, you ready to get into some songs, guys?